All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Chloe Vestayi, and I'm one of the organizers for the Hacker Book Club. And with me, I have my co-moderator, Angela. Angela, would you like to say hello?
Everyone, glad you're here.
Excellent.
Hi.
We are recording this session, so just let people know ahead of time because we know that this is a pretty spectacular thing. In love, you guys may miss it because of the world is going crazy. With me, I have the writer of Cult of the Dead Cow, Joseph Menn. I will call him Joe for now on, though. And of course, I have these wonderful guests that I would love for them to introduce themselves. Adam, would you like to kick it off?
Sure. My name is Adam O'Donnell. I am a member of the Cult of the Dead Cow. I was in the book. I don't know what else to really say. How would you like us to introduce ourselves?
That was perfect and beautiful. All right, Death Veggie, would you like to go next?
You're muted, Veggie. I'm Death Veggie. I'm the Cult of the Cow's Minister of Propaganda, and apparently I don't know how to use a mute button, but now it's working.
All right, Chris, it's your turn now.
Hey, Chris Ryu, otherwise known as Still Dog, former author of Back Orifice 2000 and Loft
Did you
Heavy
stop
Industries.
being the author of Back Orifice 2000 at some point?
No, clearly. And ex-founder of Veracode, and now just working on secret projects in my spare time. So nice to be here.
Nice to have you. Guest number 2, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I can't figure out how to change my name to my name, so I'm Obscure, or Paul Leonard. I'm in the book too, I guess, and that's about, I guess I'm doing as good as Adam as far as coming up with reasons for being here.
Love it. Okay, CDC Surdistic.
Surdistic, I wrote the original Back Orifice, and thank you for letting me join.
I love the imagery. Guest number 3, would you like to introduce yourself?
So I think this is me. This is Omega. I am a member of CDC since 1992, and I'm happy to be here.
And Reed?
Hi, this is Reed Fleming. I'm another member of the CDC, and I don't know what my claim to fame is, but anyway, I'm here.
The world's angriest milkman, obviously.
Love it. Okay, so let's first start off with the big question of the day. For those that do not know the Cult of the Dead Cow, or CDC, can you guys explain a little bit about yourselves and how this came about?
You might want to let me take that one, because otherwise everybody's going to go off, on their own thing for a while. I can sort of I can be objective here and maybe get through it faster. So CDC is the oldest surviving and most influential group of U.S. hackers ever. They were founded probably in 1984. They're still around today, as you can see. They were most famous maybe ballpark 20 years ago for Back Orifice and then BO2K, which were publicly distributed hacking tools for breaking into Windows, which forced Microsoft to take security more seriously. And they coined the term hacktivism, which they defined, among other things, as hacking in service of human rights, which has become really, it seems like it's more important every year. And then they've gone on to do amazing things individually as well, public, private, and in volunteer sectors.
So how did you all connect with each other then? Like, how did you find each other?
Personal ads.
Personal ads, misconnections. No. This is back in the day, in the pre-internet or pre-popularization of internet for most of us. So we're talking about bulletin board systems, where I think most of us found out about them via text files and posts on other bulletin boards. So it's a matter of sort of finding like-minded weirdos. For me, I can say for myself, I grew up as the weirdo in a small town, and so all of a sudden I sort of learned that there were other people out there like me who I could talk to and learn things with.
And this was literally in the war games era, at least for many of us in the 80s. And
Yeah.
when I moved to Boston, for instance, I literally had to war dial the entire 617 area code to find the single hacker BBS that existed so that I could hook up with people like Death Veggie or White Knight, for instance. Mudge did the same. He war dialed the entire Boston 617 area code in order to find the one BBS where the rest of us existed, where we were on this BBS. So you certainly had to expend a lot of effort in some cases to meet other people.
I met the team here a little later on, and had previously just done a bunch of my own sort of hacking research and publication when I went to college in Boston. I grew up in Maine, so it was basically bulletin boards. I just heard names. I knew these names from bulletin boards, but had really no chance to meet anybody until I got to Boston. And then I realized, like, there's actually a lot of these people in Boston. The Loft was in Boston. A bunch of CDC people were in Boston. I actually didn't end up meeting a lot of the people here until I actually met them at like DEF CON at in Vegas. I was at DEF CON 4, but back in '96, and met a lot of people that turned out to be all like Boston people, and then we all just hung out when we all got back home. So that was sort of my social introduction to these folks.
Yeah, I started running a BBS when I was 14, so I'd been aware of the Cult of the Dead Cow from having collected T files from back in the day, text files. But then I first met some CDC people at DEF CON 3, and became a member about a year or so later.
And I think I'm the oldest still, other than Kevin. I started calling BBSs in Illinois when I was in my early teens, and in my late teens, like 1988, 89, I ran into some other CDC members from Michigan, G.A. Ellsworth, and from there I got invited into the group. So no Boston connection, just out in the Midwest all by myself.
I had an account on GA's BBS before I even knew who CDC was, and I was reading CDC text files on his BBS. That was probably like 1986, 87.
Guess that leaves Adam.
Yeah, I would say I was doing a lot of things with computers in Philly, and there really wasn't anyone to hook up with there. And then the mid-late 90s, I started going up to New York 2600, and I met some guys there, and then ended up taking a train and started hanging out in Boston, and met a bunch of the Loft guys there because I did a bunch of radio crap, and there were two guys at the Loft, Kingpin and Brian Oblivion were the two that I most jived with there, and then I started feeling like, oh, wait a second, I finally found my people that I could meet face to face. But before that, like other people said, it was a collection of names on the screen.
Okay, Joseph, I have a question. I know I'm supposed to call you Joe. So Joe.
It's fine. It's okay. I've been called a lot worse.
I think that means you're in trouble, Joe.
A question for you. How did you hear about them? That's what I'm curious about too,
How did I hear about them?
Mm-hmm. How did you hear about Cult of the Dead Cow?
So it would have been in around 99 is when I started covering tech. I was working in San Francisco for the LA Times, and so I started covering tech, and I sort of immediately gravitated towards security. I thought it was like the most interesting part of tech because it crossed all these lines. It was a criminal justice thing and a tech thing and a business thing, and eventually it would wind up being a geopolitical thing. So I was interested in hackers, and most hackers with any sense, like, totally shied away from the press, didn't trust us or didn't want to get exposed or whatever. And the CDC was the opposite. They were like running towards the cameras. And so they had this amazing list. I think Omega kept it, but there's this amazing media list, and I was on it. And so I got these missives from them every so often, and they were really weird. Some of them were pointing out serious security issues, and some of it was just, it was like Hunter S. Thompson type stuff. It was just like hallucinatory gibberish. And at the time, I was like, I don't have time to sort out like what's important stuff that the public needs to know, and what's going to make a monkey out of me. I just like I don't, so I never wrote about them at all. And then my first solo book was about Napster, and Sean Fanning, the guy who came up with Napster, was in another very cool old school hacking group called Woo Woo, which has some overlap with CDC. And I guess what happened was, I asked him at one point, like, why didn't you go straight? There were some jumping off points in Napster where Sean Fanning could have gone legit. And it's like these guys, they offered you, they had a good lawyers, a good venture capitalist, and you were going to get $1 million. And Sean Fanning laughed and he said, yeah, $1 million in a monster truck. And I'm like, what do you mean $1 million in a monster truck? He said, oh, it's a CDC thing. And so then I read up on CDC after that. So it's one of those guys can tell you about the $1 million in a monster truck, what that means.
That's really interesting, Joe. I didn't realize that you were on the media list. I guess I'll have to look at that. So in CDC, we kept sort of a clip file of every time that we were mentioned in some kind of media, whether it was like Computer World or Time Magazine or some
or Sassy
or Sassy Magazine.
Yeah, Sassy was great.
Oh yeah, that's a whole separate conversation. But I kept a clip file of all the times we were in media, and so one of the goals of the Cult of Dead Cow is global domination through media saturation. So it's our goal to get in as much media as possible, to get cited as much as possible, and so I sort of took it upon myself to keep track of that. And then when we so many different citations, I would essentially spam these out to as many journalists, celebrities, all kinds of people who really didn't care about this list of stuff. And so literally, we're like emailing Kanye, we're emailing Reuters reporters, Wired reporters,
Debbie Gibson, Tiffany.
Debbie Gibson, yeah. All kinds of people who probably didn't care and never replied to this, but we're just spamming them. Starting in probably like 1993, 1994, before most people sort of knew what spam was and they had just gotten email accounts, we were spamming you with all the amazing things that we were up to, and hoping that it would make a difference, hoping that it would lead to more media citations, right? And so I guess in this case it did. I didn't realize, Joe, that you were on our list, but I'll have to look at the sort of the back list of who we were mailing to see that.
Somebody needs to explain the $1 million in a monster truck. Chris, you want to do that?
Or Reed. Reed would be good.
Okay,
yeah, Reed would be good.
Yeah, knock it out, Reed.
Well, okay, so this could be a long story, but so when BO2K was about to be released, we got a inquiry from Internet Security Systems, this InfoSec vendor in Atlanta, I think. Mm-hmm. And so they sort of reached out to us and asked if they could have a copy of it. And they were hinting strongly that they'd be willing to pay money for it.
Yeah, like a pre-release, let us be the first company to build a detection system for BO2K.
Yeah, they wanted the source code. Even though it was going to be open source, they wanted
early access
ahead of time.
Special early access, trying to pull some hacker strings.
Well, they wanted early access because when BO came out, they made a big deal of announcing that they were the first people to protect against back orifice, even though all they really did was add a signature to their virus database. And they had people in the crowd grabbing CDs so they could have first access to it.
Yeah, so that was 98. So in 99, they're pinging us and asking us for this copy because they want to announce on day one that they have a solution to protect their customers from this evil tool. And so we talked about is this a trap? Is this some kind of entrapment? Because
it might well have been, because you go engage in commerce on a tool
Yeah,
of this
if you-
nature,
That's
it
what our
might
lawyer
have been
said.
used as a pretense to suggest that we're doing this for profit or something.
Yeah, we talked to our lawyer about this and some other things, and
Our
this
lawyer
didn't
was
sound right. Cindy Crone, who's now in charge of EFF, right?
Yep.
But she was in private practice back then. And so anyway, we wrote a response, and the response basically said, look, give us $1 million in a monster truck and we'll do it. And what the funny thing was, we had this internal debate that was very brief, which was, what if we get the monster truck? How do we provide the monster truck? But that
Who
turned
gets
out not to
custody?
be an issue, yeah.
Yeah. No. And the monster truck is a reference to some of the CDC mythology from T-files if you read through them, early T-files. So
Like 200, right?
Yeah.
And my recollection from that was that our discussion between us and ISS was continually escalating, where we were like,
Yeah, initially we were just like, hey, if you send us a formal request, thinking they wouldn't do that, they wouldn't go into writing, but then, this FedExed letter shows up saying with a formal request for the source code, and we're like, oh shit, they called our bluffs. What do we do now?
Yeah, there was a series of those where they sort
Yeah.
of we're not really committed to helping them out, but they're calling, and so we're putting little blockades in their path. They call our bluff. They send us FedEx letters from the CEO and the CISO of ISS and so on and on.
Well, that's why they were so angry, was because we said we'd consider it if we got I was first approached on IRC by somebody I vaguely knew, and was approached, asking for this, and we discussed it, and I asked if it was coming from him or if it was coming from the company. He said the company. So I said, well, if you send a formal request on letterhead, we'll consider it. And so I think at that point they thought they were actually going to get it. Yeah. So when our response was just flippant, they were furious.
Yeah.
All right, let's keep moving here. What else you got? We got 3 decades of these guys.
Angela, go away. I mean, go ahead. Not go away. Sorry.
Bye. Where did the name come from? I mean, it could have been Cult of the Dead, anything, right? Why cow?
Well, it's one of these things where some people would say that CDC has always been and always will be a sort of universal constant, if you will. Other people say that we're an ancient Gnostic order with roots to the worship of Hathor, the cow goddess in ancient Egypt.
You're not supposed to talk about that.
Oh no. And some people say that it was because a bunch of punk kids in Lubbock, Texas used to hang out in an abandoned slaughterhouse. But, you can choose which one of those you choose to believe.
I think I like Eric Bloodaxe's sort of answer about this kind of question back in the before time. Somebody was asking Eric Bloodaxe, who's a member of the Legion of Doom, how did you come up with the name Legion of Doom? And Eric Bloodaxe said, well, if we picked Legion of Pansies, no one would ever take us seriously, right? So that's kind of the flavor of that's one of the reasons why Cult of the Dead Cow was picked.
So the same reason I picked Dill Dog as my handle. Knows to be taken seriously.
Yeah, I wouldn't know anything about that. I got to take this thing off. It's really hot.
Do it. I want to see what you look like. Oh my God.
Oh my God, there's a face underneath that? No, I'm just kidding.
Oh, my secret identity revealed.
Okay, I have a question for you. I'm very much into the ethical scene and whatnot. But I'm curious, what were some of I guess the ethical problems that you guys faced and discussed and then probably debated quite often back in the day?
I mean, there's a lot related to back orifice and then BO2K. I mean, there were questions about how dangerous we wanted to make this. How seriously we wanted this to. If we wanted to make this difficult to detect and uncover. Or was it just a sort of a, as Tweetyfish called it, a proof of concept on Microsoft's insecurity, but I think that's a question better sort of left to Sardistic and maybe Dilldog.
Well, I mean, the idea of releasing a tool that would essentially allow unskilled script kiddies to, use the complete lack of security in Windows 95 to potentially do pretty much whatever they wanted to a remote machine, was definitely something we discussed, and we decided to do it after a fair amount of debate.
Yeah. A lot of that kind of came around again with BO2K as we sort of upped the ante from Windows 95, which was very popular for home use. You started to look at corporations that were adopting Windows NT in 2000 for critical business work. So suddenly you have this remote administration system that could be used to manipulate corporate systems. So suddenly you're starting to look a little more malicious. So you have to be a little more careful. That said, when we thought about it, Microsoft already had a lot of remote administration features built into Windows. Not enough to be able to do some of the things BO2K was doing, but there were a lot of other third-party tools like PC Anywhere and some of these other administration suites that people were charging a lot of money for. This was just more free and accessible and smaller and more optimized and a whole bunch of other things. And generally was like, if you wanted to control a system remotely, there are other ways to do it. There were other, remote access, underground remote access systems as well that existed. So the precedent was already there. It's not like we were really changing that. One other thing was, we had to decide, what functionality in general to put in there. And BO2K was developed as a pluggable system. That way we could have a platform.
Butt plugs.
Yeah, butt plugs we call them. But we had this pluggable system where you could add functionality to it after the fact. And we had an SDK where people could write their own plugins and plug them in. That way, if there was funky, nifty, kind of sketchy shit you wanted to do with it, you could choose to do that with your own code and it wouldn't be our problem. But it would also made it extensible in general for a platform for like whatever. I actually released some professional plugins that never sold for any money from Loft to do like file transfers and remote registry editing and all this kind of stuff that eventually ended up just becoming part of sort of Microsoft's Windows administration stuff.
And it worked very well. That's the key thing, is
was
that
reliable.
it was actually a solid product.
Yeah.
I used it for remote administration at work for a while.
It was encrypted,
and it was encrypted and it was safe. It was. And
I got email from tons of people being, people in the Navy, people in universities saying, hey, we're using this for remote administration of devices in our labs live. People used it for that.
Yeah.
And I think
it was probably driving submarines or something like that at some point.
I think it's important to mention that antivirus vendors, right, are trying to detect malware and create signatures for it to prevent it, right? You had commercial applications, Dildog mentioned, like PC Anywhere, that had similar capabilities to BO2K and BO. Why weren't they detected by antivirus? If I somehow tricked you into installing PC Anywhere, I could get the same capabilities and remotely administer your machine without you knowing it. The thing is that antivirus vendors did not create signatures for commercial applications. So
we did talk about charging for it for specifically that reason. Be like, okay, now we're a commercial application. What are you going to do now?
So Sub 7 was Sub 7 was sort of a malware platform that came along after BO2K that had similar capabilities that decided to charge like a couple of dollars to purchase, and we remained free. I suspect one of the reasons why they decided to charge money is so that they could not be detected by malware detection.
Yeah, they could claim damages or something.
Yeah, because it's essentially a restraint of trade, right? So if we're charging money and you have an application that denies me income, right, then that's restraint of trade. And so we actually had an internal discussion within CDC, knowing that should we start charging $1 for BO2K in
I
order
remember that.
to prevent semantic antivirus and other antivirus vendors from detecting us. Ultimately, we decided not to charge anything, but that's kind of like a sort of quirk that hadn't occurred to us at the beginning, that sort of came later.
There was also some expensive, very similar software that was being sold to private agencies and probably government agencies too. I remember one called Dirt that had a
Yeah.
lot of the same functionality, and because it was a quote unquote professional application that did basically the same thing and was installed surreptitiously on people's computers, it wasn't scanned for.
Yeah.
Exactly. So if the FBI charged money to other law enforcement organizations for dirt, then semantic antivirus was not creating signatures for it, especially because the FBI was installing that surreptitiously on other people's computers to surveil them, right? So,
It's all that dirty money.
between dirt, Sub7, and BO2K, which one is the malware and which one isn't, right?
What's you got, Angela or Chloe?
We have another question for you, which is, Joe, for you. What was it like to communicate with the members when you decided you wanted to research around them and about them?
Well, let's see. So I had met a couple members, back in the day because I've been around covering this stuff for a long time. I'd gotten to be friendly with a couple of them. And when I started kicking this around as a book idea, I was pretty open about what I was trying to do, which was tell like a positive, even inspirational story, because my last book would have been like such a downer about how basically we're all screwed in cybersecurity, which is still true, but that's not a reason to like stop fighting. And so I wanted to do something that was positive. And because CDC went all the way back, and because it hit like all the major inflection points in security, from sort of the turning point in 95 and 96 to everybody getting on the net, to the sort of like the security becoming big business, and then there's a WikiLeaks piece of this, like all the big, they pioneered at the Loft coordinated disclosure. I mean, like every major thing that has happened, there's some CDC connection to, including some of the really great stuff like Citizen Lab and Tor. And so I was open about what there was going to be positive, but I wasn't going to hide criminal stuff or whatever. I mean, it was going to be the whole story. And, I think the most important role was really played by the statute of limitations, which made it a lot easier for people to talk about stuff they did back in the day. So, I mean, I was transparent about my process, what I was going to try and do, and it took years. I mean, I guess they kept they kept talking behind my back, and I guess everything checked out. So, and they'd read my other stuff. They read the Napster book, or they knew people who were in it, or whatever. So, I mean, it was actually it was actually a great process. It was a lot of fun.
Oh, thanks, Joe. So for you members, did anyone reach out to you after reading the book and realizing, hey, I know this guy, and did you get any fan mail or anything the opposite of fan mail, hate mail?
My family members.
Yeah.
I definitely had, the CTO at my company started calling me Death Veggie, which was awkward. But other than that, nothing super negative, just a little bit weird, but not super negative.
Good.
Nobody showed up at my door or anything like that.
Yeah, nobody showed up at my house, but it's an awkward conversation for some family members. There are many of my family members who don't know about the book and haven't read it, which is fine, because it would be a really awkward conversation otherwise. But yeah.
And Joe, what about people that you reached out to that declined? What kind of responses did you get?
Well, I mean, I think every member of CDC that's in the book has their real name attached. I mean, there are a couple people in footnotes that don't have their real names attached. But much to my great surprise and delight, like everybody agreed to be named at the end. And that was wonderful. I expected it to be a mixed bag. I mean, some had already been outed before I started writing. Mudge and Chris were among those. The New York Times outed Sadistic when BO came out. But everybody agreed in the end. And I guess I think part of it was the big celebrity politician guy, that if he was willing to out himself, then, you know, there's nobody who had more to lose than that. And so I think it was kind of a solidarity thing that, you know, we're all Spartacus, sure.
So this is a good time to announce that Joe Biden was a member of the Cult of the Dead Cow.
So this was actually my greatest fear in writing the book, that these guys would prank me, because they're world famous pranksters, and it's terrifying. And they pranked my brethren and sister in the media really badly, including some really good publications, journalists I know and like. And so I was completely paranoid and went nuts, fact checking everything, getting you know, contemporaneous emails and chat logs and stuff like that. And they knew, and I told them early on that I was going to need that, because I just, you know, I'm not going to risk my career, no matter how good the story is, for shit that was made up. So if I couldn't get it nailed, it didn't go in the book. And eventually I was able to, I think, confirm everything that was serious in there. A lot of people not in the CDC, but in government, big companies, whatever, you know, confirmed the key parts that were in question. So.
Hey,
It definitely was a tough decision to agree to use our real names. I know for me, and probably some other people, you know, that, you know, we'd spent literally decades sort of curating our online identity specifically to avoid leaking out our real names.
Yeah.
So it was not an easy call, at least for myself.
Yeah, and Joe spends a significant portion of the early part of the book talking about all the people who got busted.
Yeah.
And you know, we spent a lot of trying to figure out how to not to get busted, and we were all pretty successful at it. And step one is not telling people who you are. So I mean, this is a sort of reflex that all of us have had for decades. You know, how do we curate our presence? How do we
well-honed hacker survival instincts?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. They're all reflexes and survival instincts.
So we got a question in for you guys, which is, where do you all think is the future of CDC? Do you see the group return to the subversive writing of your roots, or continue going a deeply technical route?
Global domination. I mean, without any question, I think, you know, that's the future.
We're 3/4 way there, so.
Yeah, you know, we're there.
I wish Laird were here. He would certainly want to weigh in on that. He has a bunch of interesting opinions on what the direction of CDC is.
Well, it is the wee hours of the night in his bunker in, you know, Eastern Europe. So
yeah, I think one of the good things about CDC that Joe highlighted is that as a collective, we have lots of contentious internal discussions. So, you know, to the public, we present as a single sort of homogenous hive mind. We have
herd, if you will.
A herd, yes, a herd. We present a single answer to the public, and sort of that's the way that we present. But internally, we have very
vibrant and sometimes contentious
discussions. And so, you know, Laird Oxblood is one of the people who is very opinionated. He has you know, he has opinions that diverge from many of us, not all of us. And so anytime he joins a discussion about some particular topic, he is always an interesting person, or has interesting ideas to deal with. So I just kind of want to put that out. You know, the direction of CDC, whether 10 years ago or now, is something that we've been arguing over, you know, forever. And we sort of organically arrive at, you know, what is the consensus? What do we really feel meets the requirements of our group, and then we sort of go from there.
I would also volunteer that we each individually do things that are very much in the spirit of a lot of our shared values.
I mean, Adam can break dance like nobody you've ever seen,
Oh
so
my
that's what
God!
brought him into the herd.
I
You can pop and lock, you know.
I know. I appropriate African American culture as fast as the rest of you. But
as fast as congressional
Not so
Democrats
much.
wearing scarves.
exactly. But I know, at least for myself, I've been giving some guidance to some of the people in the streets regarding secure communications. I'm sure some of the rest of you have been doing the same as well. I think that a lot of what we do is, it's silent until it's loud.
To me, the short answer to this question is something that Mudge frequently treats, and that is, go out and make a dent, make a difference, make a positive difference in the world in some way. And we can have disagreements within CDC that you're not aware of about, what that is exactly. But that is the direction that we're all moving towards. And I think as individuals, that's what we're all trying to do. How do we make a positive difference in something that we feel expert in, or something that interests us? How do we make a positive difference? I think that's all these.
Yeah.
That's going to be our sort of North Star.
I think we joke about taking over the world, but in all seriousness, we definitely want to change the world. We definitely want to have an impact, a positive impact on the world as a whole. And I think in a lot of ways that's what CDC has been about, at least for me, and I think many of us. Is it's like, okay, we're these weird kids who often grew up in the middle of nowhere, and how are we gonna have an impact? And CDC's the way.
What do you think made you guys famous initially? Was there one event or a few, and then you were kind of like, oh wow, this is really happening?
Depends on what
Geraldo.
scene or crowd you're talking about.
The foolishness of the media. Sorry, Joe.
Not all
Well, I
media.
think a lot of it was that we were big fish in a very small pond at the very beginning. There were, in the beginning, there were text files, and that's teenagers and writing their horrible fiction and poetry. I'm guilty of that, Lord only knows. But there was not a lot of content to be had. So if you did anything even reasonably well, you could get some notice, and that was fun. And once you started realizing that you could say your own things and do what you wanted to do and have people enjoy it, then that's all the more reason to get in and do more.
So I want to jump in, even though the question wasn't for me, because I think that's one of the things that makes this a great story, is that they didn't start out as moral superheroes at age 13 and 14. It's
Didn't
like
we though?
Yes, we did.
it's that they had to kind of level up, on the ethical figuring what to do as the stakes got higher. And again, like big thing. So when everybody gets online, the fact that you actually know shit becomes, you sort of have more responsibility because of that. And so I think that's really interesting. And the fame is part of that. Okay, now there's the spotlight. What do we do with it? And they tried to do the right thing, and they argued about what the right thing was. And I feel like, I had multiple audiences in mind for this book, but certainly one of them is people who are just now getting into security. Now that it's like a clean, established field where you can go to a nice, clean college and go work for a nice, clean company and do cybery things without doing the moral work of figuring out, well, that's against the law, but it's probably good for the world. Should I do it? And you can, if you don't have that kind of forge, then you can sleepwalk into doing things that aren't actually good for anybody. And I want people to not have to read 30 years worth of Usenet to figure out what the right calls are. I want them to be able to read a fun story and say, oh, I can see why we wound up in this place, or I disagree with him on that, but I see where they're coming from. That kind of thing.
And I think
Definitely,
in our
definitely so.
era, I think in our era, surveillance tech is the prime example of that. If you are a software developer and you're hired to do something that's related to surveillance tech, there's all kinds of moral and ethical issues there that you may want to examine.
Definitely something CDC did that was very unhacker-like was communicate with the press. And I think a large part of the public first heard of us because we invited the press, to DEF CON, 98.
No,
And
to,
they
Oh,
actually
to
showed
and
up.
HoHoCon, to
HoHoCon.
HoHoCon in 93, 92, 94.
Yeah.
So I have a question for you guys. So I've been trying to get us to have rights in a sense, and it's really hard because with you have the UMCA, you have CFA, and all that, and it's hurting our community in a sense. If we want to do good hacking or get penalized for it, I was wondering, Joe, has any politicians read your book? And if they did, have they said anything? Have they turned around and been like, "Oh man, our laws are out of date and are hurting people. Maybe we should do something about that"? I'm just curious. Have you had any comments like that?
I want to
So
know the answer to this question too.
I know that Adam
Yeah.
Schiff and Nancy have copies.
Adam Schiff and Nancy Pelosi. I suspect that one ex-congressman probably has a copy kicking around somewhere.
Oh my gosh.
So you're talking about Steve King?
So there are some politicians in the book. The books that I write, I am aiming in part at a policy audience because they have a fair amount of power, and these are big, important issues, and they need to be brought up to speed on in a gentle way. My previous book was called Fatal System Error, and it was about how screwed we all are. And I put I rooted around for like a narrative thread that had hookers and guns, so that even politicians would be willing to read it. You can't just be about code. So yes, some have read this book. There's definitely a DC component to it. Sean Hannity certainly called it out. And I hope that they take away not just like CFAA reform is a good thing, but that outsiders can be an extremely valuable contributors to society, and you want them inside the tent, and they can go do that Amish walkabout thing, whatever they call it, for a year or so, and then bring them back.
Rumspringa.
Thank you. See, the CDC guys know everything. And so I hope that's one of the takeaways. I mean, I think the core components of the group really are one or more moral causes, adaptability to new circumstances, and critical thinking. And we're in an era where critical thinking is under threat as never before. And so that ought to be held up to the public. And if the public gets enough of a clue, then often the leadership, the politicians will try and get in front of the people. That's how it should be.
Yeah, I've been thinking like if you're going to get any rights, you have to work with organizations, the press, to push for politicians and legislation to change is one of the things I've been thinking about. So now I'm considering, do you think it'd be a wise decision to send your book to every single legislator on Capitol Hill? Do you think that would help?
Yes, I think that would be a good thing. Somebody should do that.
Yeah.
Jeff Moss, the founder of DEF CON, said that after the last book came out, like every time he went to Washington, and he advised like DHS, he still advised DHS. Every time he went to Washington, he would get 10 copies of my book and hand it out to folks, so they would get up to speed in a friendly way. That's really what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to educate in a painless way with good true stories. So yes, it would be great if more people.
Yeah, maybe what we should do is also put in there like a one-pager, like main takeaway notes, so then in case
Abstract.
they can't read it and their interns can't read it for them, at least we could do the intern work, which is like, here's the bullet points you need to learn.
And then if going to certain places in Washington, just do a drawing, one drawing,
Exactly.
Some sort of zodiac note for Ted Cruz,
right, we've got two questions from the chat in the Q&A. So first one being, I started knowing about you guys around 95 through FRAC. My question is, with all the white hat CopyCons, ethical-esque, and certifications, does the underground still exist? If it does, is it still more advanced than corporate white hats in terms of research and bleeding edge stuff? I love you guys together with the loft.
I think it's different than bleeding edge corporate research. You're always going to get, the sort of like weird genius in his basement who spends all night up on caffeine and less legal things, who discovers the sort of like odd exploit or weird backdoor. But I also think that a lot of that has now been commercialized through bug bounties, things like that. And you've also, individuals are never going to be able to compete at scale with either corporations or nation states. I mean, that's just, things are definitely different than they were.
The idea of marketplace is a lot more liquid. It's not like the pockets are as easy to just exist and stay isolated. I think that the pressure of money and the actual utility of the attacks makes it a lot less logical to keep things hidden, and there's a lot more ways for things to leak and to be valued in several different ways. Dill, what do you think?
I mean, the underground as it exists today is still highly motivated and polarized by politics. There's a lot of reasons why people would choose to do hacking type things, where the reasons have gone beyond just curiosity and exploration. Yes, there are plenty of people that hack for the sort of original sort of ethos of it all, but that's less underground. That's become very mainstream to do. The people who are hacking with a sort of underground component are hiding not because they are afraid of, it used to be that you didn't want your name associated with your security research because you thought you'd get like fired from your job or something like that. Just the very fact that you could be associated with that was often enough times, to have people push you away. These days, it's actually like a badge of honor. You do any of this stuff, and you might even get a promotion at work for things you did outside of your job. The more illegal side of things, the motivations are different these days, and it's more clear where the lines are. So you're not going to be seeing people testing the water so much. If you commit to doing something underground, it's because you've given it a lot of thought, and you're usually pretty mission oriented. Get the hell in, get the hell out. Not I'm going to explore here for a while and then share about all the shit that I did on IRC where everyone could read it and think I'm cool. You're not in it for the fame so much. If anything, the exact opposite. You're looking to get some shit done, and
get paid.
Mission accomplished. Get the hell out. Either get paid or have some effect. On if you're rating S3 buckets on Amazon and that's your thing, you dump a whole shitload of police body camera footage that wasn't released to the public. Suddenly, maybe that's mission accomplished. That's the kind of thing people do when they're bored and have a political motivation these days. So those kinds of people, they exist, and they broker that data. They'll go and hey, look at all this recordings. Oh, look, they can get all these people's Nest recordings from inside their house. What do you do with all that? You sell it to people? Do you send it to law enforcement? What do you do? And
give it to your friends.
Depending on who's doing it, their motivations will dictate what happens to that data. So I mean, yeah, those underground actors do exist, but I'd say that their motivations are very different now than they would have, say, been 20 years ago.
Yeah, I think it has to do with scarcity of resources and availability. Now, internet is like breathing. It's everywhere, at all times. And back in the day, it was something that if you wanted access to systems, you had to take it, and that was your choice. Now there's really no really great reason for doing that, because you can have an entire network all virtualized on one machine and do anything you could possibly ever want.
I know that this is scheduled for like 1 hour, but can I keep you guys for an extra 10?
Oh yeah, I have
10
restaurant
hours?
reservations right now.
10 hours.
So we had another question that came in, which was one of the things that's so interesting about CDC is how it has evolved on its path to world domination. With that in mind, how often does the herd expand? Does mentorship factor into your plans and schemes? Should it?
I think, CDC has always maintained a relatively tight membership list. We've never had more than a maximum of about 20 people at any given time. I think it's sort of weird that as we have gotten older, in some ways the membership list has sort of ossified. So I think I don't know that I really have an answer why that is. If I had to sort of speculate, I think it has a lot to do with the fact that membership requires consensus in our group, and we're a bunch of independently minded weirdos who nowadays spend a lot less time sort of interacting with each other on a daily basis than we did 20-25 years ago, because we have lives, we have families, we've got busy jobs, we've got cats that won't leave us alone. And I think maybe that's why it's just it's also been a point of a sort of contention within the herd about whether or not we should be letting in more people faster or not. I think we were also sort of burned by one of the last people that we let join was Jake Applebaum, and that turned out to be a terrible mistake, because he turned out to be not a good guy, to put it very mildly. Yeah, I think rapist is a fair way to put it.
Yeah, and once you get bitten by something like that, it makes you think really, really hard about who you let in, because
you only want to let in people you're really
knit.
sure about.
And and CDC, between members is like an extended family, more so than anything else. So when things have gone wrong, and with Jake it absolutely went wrong in one of the worst ways possible, that hurt us quite a bit, and we're still kind of reeling from that a little bit.
Yeah, and even more so, something I hold a little bit of guilt about is I'm afraid that, especially people that use a social platform or branding to allow themselves to meet and interact with more and more people, or to use that to get into more spaces, that our name in some ways allow them to abuse more people, and that I carry with me.
We have a follow-up question to the underground question, which is, where do you guys think you and others like you can best use their influence in these crazy times? I'm sure there are young people who read the book and identify with the ethos and are wondering.
Take to the streets. If you're an adult and you have finances, I would please implore you to donate, especially to state house races before the 2020 census in America.
And local races.
And local, yeah. When I say state house races, I mean as well as local DAs are a great example of a way of.
I think a message I would have is people don't let yourself get too cynical about whether or not you are able to make a difference. I think all of us can, and whether it's through money, whether it's through activism, whether it's through hacktivism. I think don't sell yourself short by thinking that there's nothing you can do to make a difference.
Yeah.
Besides,
So some of us are fundraising for JD
The guy in your shirt.
Well, yes, as well, but we'll see where that goes. Some of us are fundraising for JD Schulten in late 2017, I want to say, and he's the man that raised the profile of how awful Steve King was and got within a few points of beating him, like 3,000 votes. I don't think that Steve King would have lost his primary if it wasn't for JD in there. So you can actually see real connections from your actual action. I mean, the people that have taken to the streets in the past week have now been able to build a real public message around defunding the police, as well as serious reform that you're starting to see move through several state houses. I mean,
well, and the cancellation of the Cops show tonight and Live PD,
and they still canceled Futurama. But we can all have an impact, and
Yeah, and I think it's key that we all realize and communicate to people that everything that we do is political in one way or another, and you can't divorce your technological interests from the realities of society and your role in that. So, in terms of what can somebody who's inspired by us do, and the easiest answer is get involved with whatever you're interested in, and to take advantage of your skills and your knowledge and your abilities and do anything that you think can help out.
Something you care about.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
And I think it's important also to provide security and communication secrecy for the fourth estate. So I saw maybe a week ago a sign from one of the protests that said, first they came for the journalists, and then we don't know what happened after that. Right. And so the journalists like Joe and others are,
society's first line of defense.
We can only make decisions based on the available information to us. If we have no information, then how can we make the best decisions, right? And so,
especially when we're under assault by active campaigns of disinformation under the guise of journalism, be it Fox News or OANN or what have you.
Right. And so, journalists are under physical threat. I think many of us are aware of that now over the last few weeks, but they've been under cyber threat for years and years and years, right? So what can we as individuals do to shore up their ability to meet in confidence with sources, to file stories in confidence, to bear witness to things that are very uncomfortable to the power structure? How do what can we do to help shore up those folks? And so I think that's another important, not just participating in state elections and just elections in general, but for those of us who have some sort of security background or software development background, what can we do to shore up the people who bear witness to what's actually going on, and those folks who are communicating what's going on to the rest of us so that we can make the best decisions possible.
And you see amazing examples of that coming out of the traditional hacker underground, things like Moxie Marlin Spike and Signal. I mean, this is literally something that I would say is saving lives.
Absolutely.
I think there are countless other examples too, and so this is happening out there. You can make a difference.
Thank you. Joe, quick question for you. So since you wrote this book, right, and everybody kind of has their beginners, 1980s start for the most part, which one of the members do you identify with the most?
Ooh.
Omega.
That's interesting. I never thought about that. So I have
Crass
something in
cat.
common. I have something in common with a number of things in common with a lot of them. I mean, I'm generally just a couple years older than the sort of like the original main cohort, but I grew up around Boston. My musical taste seems to be most aligned with Ellsworth's. But I got the Boston thing with a lot of them, but I'm not a coder. So the last program I wrote was in BASIC, and it was a very long time ago. So I tend to relate to more the liberal arts text file guys. I don't know, different people in different ways. I can pass for normal. I can speak human.
Can you?
Sometimes. So, I'm not like
We're
Beto,
all
but
normal Joe.
I don't know, man. They're all different. I mean, Misha in some ways because he's a words person. Omega, because he's a words person. I'm certainly not a graphic artist, so that takes me out from Paul. I'm not the hardcore tech guys. So I guess of the people I see on the screen before me, I guess I relate most to Omega.
Yay!
Well, I want to first say thank you, Joe, for writing this book and being dedicated to getting the story out, and for finding out about CDC. I'm so thankful for, and thank you to CDC for being open to talking to him, sharing everything, so that this book could be created, because this is great. I look forward to carrying this book around and have spare copies. So in the future, when I'm out in public, when we're not in the middle of a pandemic, anytime someone takes a step back when I say hacker or work with hackers, I'll be like, no, read this. Anyway, thank you guys for being on here, and thank you to people that attended. This is being recorded, so you can watch it all over again if you like, share with your family, your friends. Most important thing is that I think, Joe, one of the reasons you wrote the book was also to show people outside of InfoSec about InfoSec. And that's what we need to do as InfoSec people, is get more out there and have those awkward conversations and get people to know outside. I would love to invite you guys to attend all our Hacker Book Club meetings. We will be covering Cult of the Dead Cow, so you guys are kicking it off, actually, believe it or not, if you didn't know that. So we'll be covering it the entire month.
Wow.
So if you guys want to come and join, do join us. We have a meeting every Tuesday at 5 p.m. And yeah, we usually do it through Zoom, but it'd be different. It won't be through a Zoom webinar. It'll be through a Zoom meetup. So you guys are more than welcome to always attend any of them.
Ain't got anywhere else to be.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chloe and Angela.
Chloe and Angela, thanks for setting this up. I think,
yeah, it's been a lot of fun.
It's been a pleasure.
Quick, before we go, anything else in the works?
None of Breonna Taylor's murderers have been arrested yet.
Are you going to arrest them?
Yes.
Oh, okay, good then.
Yeah, we've deputized him, so he might as well.
No, I'm not the enemy. No, I'm working on a state house fundraising project with some of my other compatriots that hopefully will be announced in the next few days. And a couple other house races. So not really hacking related, but more trying to get the Nazis out of the house.
We're also hoping for a resolution to our long-running legal dispute with the Centers for Disease Control over the CDC, who owns the CDC name, but they've got some other shit to deal with right now. I don't know. That's what
you see how the Space Force series on Netflix is taking the Space Force trademark away from the
and also
it's going to be like that.
Better epidemiologists than them at the moment. We may have standing.
We're part of the consent decree was that they had to change their name to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. So really, really change their acronym.
We're also trying to get the official definition for martini changed, so it is made with gin. But this
it should be.
Awesome. Yeah, please come back any Tuesday. We'll let you troll us. We get a lot of trolls for some reason, but we would love to have you troll us.
Sounds good to me.
Sure.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, everybody.
All right. Thank
All
you.
right, thank you guys.
Guys.
Thanks.